This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
In collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, israelnationalnews.com. We all remember the Holocaust, the gas chambers, the piles of dead bodies, the merciless murder of women and children and men. Of course, you also remember that girl in red, Benigni's kid on the tank, or Adrian Brody playing that dusty piano. And how can we forget Shoshana? So much of our imagery and memory of the Holocaust has been informed by stories, some of them even purely fictional. But that's the nature of time. So much of history is surrendered to the narrative, to the storytellers, the filmmakers, and the poets. What a heavy responsibility that must be. Rich Brownstein was born in Portland, Oregon in 1962. In 1989, Rich created what became Hollywood's largest transcription company, the Transcription Company, used by virtually every major studio and network, including NPR, ABC News, and Oprah. In 2003, he sold the business and moved his family to Jerusalem. He started teaching Holocaust film for Young Judaea in 2010 and branched out into Jewish film in 2013. Since 2015, Rich has been a lecturer at Yad Vashem, specializing in teaching educators how to teach the Holocaust using film. He has lectured at many colleges and universities about the history of Holocaust film, and we are very honored to be joined by Rich today to talk about the Holocaust in film. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So where do we start?
Okay, first of all, how long did it take you to come up with the name for your company?
The Transcription Company?
Yeah. Like, was it an all-nighter of
The original
brainstorming? Or
the original name of my company was Trailblazer Transcripts because I'm a Portland Trailblazer fan.
Okay.
From Portland, Oregon. And then I bought out a couple of competitors. And one of them was named Zedlar, and one was named the Transcription Zone. So I just figured I'd just put it all together, and the Transcription Company.
Cool.
Nice.
So now that we got that out of the way, I think we have to start with the question, what is, in your opinion, the best Holocaust movie ever made?
The best Holocaust film ever made by far is called The Gray Zone. It was made in 2001, and it was directed by an actor named Tim Blake Nelson, who had directed a few small movies, but he was famous for acting in Coen Brothers films, most famously Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where he co-starred with George Clooney and John Turturro. But he was also the star a few years ago in The Ballad of Billy Scruggs. He was Billy Scruggs. And last year in The Watchmen, he was the Mirror in that series. He works all the time. He's worked with Spielberg. He's
Jewish?
He is Jewish, and he is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, even a smaller town than Birmingham.
Wow.
2,300 Jews, I think.
So I bet he gets the question, there's Jews there? All the time.
Yeah, just like I get it. I'm from Portland. There are Jews in Portland.
Okay. I thought you were going to say about L.A.
No.
Nobody asked that about L.A.
So Tim wrote this play. And then he turned it into a movie. He got Harvey Keitel to be an executive producer and to co-star as a Nazi. Tim didn't appear in it. He just he got Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi and David Arquette and Mira Sorvino and a whole bunch of people who you'd recognize. And they don't dance with their kids on tanks, and there are no Nazis who save Jews, and they're not a bunch of crazy old survivors. This is about the Birkenau revolt of 1944. And it is astounding. Roger Ebert said it was one of the best films of 2002. He revisited it again in 2009 as one of the great movies. But The Gray Zone disappeared.
Why?
Because it was released on September 13th, 2001. The buildings were still smoldering after the attacks at 9/11. And it was not a good time to release a movie.
They have 2 days to postpone it. Right?
Oh, really?
And it also had really bad publicity. And also, I don't think anybody really took Tim Blake Nelson seriously as a director.
So is it like your life mission to raise awareness to that movie?
No, because there.
Do you have you have money invested in it? No.
No.
You're like, I'm gonna make that investment back.
Lose
one
money
of these
there.
days.
No. They have a total box office gross of $500,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and that includes the 3 CDs I bought. But
was it produced by a large studio?
it was produced by a couple of Israelis, mostly Millennium Productions. The people did Rambo and a bunch of other things. So
But
okay.
you know what? We talk about the Coen brothers, so Big Lebowski wasn't a big movie when it was released. It took years until it became what it became. So that's not necessarily an excuse, right? Because sometimes film becomes
Fargo. I mean, they've had some big movies, but in this case, regarding Holocaust films, there aren't a lot of big movies.
Okay, so what is the best known movie, Holocaust movie ever made in your from the movies that people know? What is the best
so
one?
let me just get this out of the way.
Okay.
Well, let me get a couple of things out of the way.
Okay.
First, I'm publishing. There's a book being published.
Yes.
Next month called Holocaust Cinema Complete, my book, which is a complete analysis of 400 Holocaust films. Every film that I considered to be a Holocaust film since 1945, 443 films, with a teaching guide. And in that book, I recommend 52 films.
Okay.
Of those 52 films, I highly recommend 15 films.
Okay.
I break down Holocaust films, into basically 4 categories. Victim films. So it took place during the Holocaust, and the protagonist was a Jew. So The Pianist is a great example of that. Righteous Gentile films. So it took place during the Holocaust, but the protagonist is a Gentile, usually saving a Jew, like in Schindler's List. But it could be there are anti-Semitic Jews in that category too, like in Conspiracy, which is about the Wannsee Conference. And then if it took place after the Holocaust and it's about a Jew, then it's a survivor film, like Harold and Maude or Adam Resurrected. And if it's after the Holocaust and it's about a Nazi, it's a perpetrator film, which is like in Israel, The Debt, Hachov, Marathon Man.
Operation Finale now with
all of those Eichmann. There are about 10 Eichmann films.
Mm-hmm.
And Mangala films. And
Munich.
then no, because they weren't Holocaust. That wasn't that.
Sorry.
Okay.
I get it mixed up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's this bonus category called tangential films, extra films. Sophie's Choice is an example. Inglourious Basterds is an example. So in Sophie's Choice, which is clearly a Holocaust film, she's not Jewish, so it can't be a victim film. She's not a righteous Gentile, so it can't be a righteous Gentile film. She's not a perpetrator, obviously, and she's not a survivor because survivors had to be Jewish. So this is the extra bonus category.
But by Inglourious Basterds? Isn't it at least a good Gentile movie or something of that sort?
Who was the good Gentile in?
The soldiers? Some of them are Jewish.
They weren't Gentile. Except for Brad Pitt, they were all Jewish.
Yeah, right. So because they're Jewish, so this movie for you,
they weren't the protagonists.
It goes in the miscellaneous category.
Right, exactly. That's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah. It's a miscellaneous category.
So,
So wait, so what is the,
all right,
best
so
known Holocaust
okay,
movie
so
in your opinion?
Give us one of those. I mean, you're gonna have to find. First of all, dear listeners, where can they get this book?
you can go to holocaustfilms.com
Okay,
and read all about it. Holocaustfilms.com.
that's your website,
That's right. Yeah,
and there you're selling the book, or it's soon to come out. You said, or it's
coming out in September.
in September.
But
Okay,
you can
so,
pre-order it.
so keep an eye out, guys. We'll
can-
post a link to the
You
website.
can order it from my publisher, McFarland Press of Jefferson, North Carolina, or from Amazon. But
Okay,
it would be nicer if you got
Yeah.
it from the little
from the
guy.
website. Yeah.
Not from the. I'm not. There's just a link to McFarland there.
okay,
It's
okay.
just I obviously if
Yeah.
you have a choice between supporting.
Support
right.
the publisher.
Right.
So to get the entire list, they're gonna have to buy the book.
Right, and
But-
the book includes the list of all 443 Holocaust films,
Yeah.
a description of them, where you can find the films, and it also includes a review of the 52 films that I recommend. Of the victim films, the 3 victim films that I recommend are The Gray Zone, obviously, and a film called Fateless, which is about a Hungarian boy who survives the camps. He basically outlives the camps. And a film called The Counterfeiters, which is a true story about, these are all true stories, about, at Sachsenhausen, there was a German program to counterfeit mostly British currency, and they flooded the banks with British currency that was made there by counterfeiters. And it's a beautifully told story about the head counterfeiter. The Pianist is also recommended, but it's not quite up there. Now, I know the question you're going to ask.
Why?
Probably has. Oh no, I didn't know that was. I thought you were going to ask me about a film that has a girl in a red.
Oh no, it's not a good movie.
But
So-
it's not a Schindler. It's not a victim movie.
No, it's not. It's a Righteous Gentile film, and it's also.
It's overestimated. I think there's a
It's
consensus.
overrated.
Overrated, yeah, overrated. Sorry. I was gonna ask why The Pianist. What do you have? Like The Pianist is superb. So what's
It
the
is
problem?
great. It's just not. It's one of my 52 most recommended. It's not top 3.
What's its problems? In your
Nothing.
opinion? Ah, okay.
It's just not as good
I
as
see.
The Gray Zone, The
Okay.
Counterfeiters, and Fateless.
Okay.
It's just.
I see.
It doesn't. It isn't as broad. It doesn't tell the same broad story, but it's a great film.
Okay.
But I do write an entire chapter about Roman Polanski and The Pianist, but only in terms of how do we see Roman Polanski and The Pianist through the lens of what we know about him being a rapist.
Ah, okay.
Like, how do you watch a Holocaust film where you have that baggage? That's what this chapter is about.
That's interesting. It's a common, I guess, question that a lot of people have about, like Michael Jackson songs, right?
He's
About
mentioned
art
in it.
general.
Even John Lennon, who beat his wife.
Yeah.
I also wonder how many Holocaust movies were made by Holocaust survivors. It's pretty rare. No? It's very unique in that sense.
Well, the survivor genre, so people who after the Holocaust, there is the most my highest recommended film, by far the greatest of survivor films. So great that no other survivor film ever had to be made. Is called The Birch Tree Meadow, which was made by a survivor, loosely based on her experience, where a woman goes back to Birkenau, slips inside, and an older woman. I mean, she's made a new life for herself. She's in her 60s, but it's time to go back and to face it. And she goes in, and no other films do this. All the other survivor films are about crazy survivors who can't function in society, and they're an embarrassment to what real survivors are. this one particular film really shows what a survivor is. So there are a few. There was another one made by a survivor. He made an animated film. He was actually on Schindler's List. Yoram, forget his last name, but the film was called Sarah and the Seventh Squirrel, and it was animated with Mia Farrow. Speaking of Woody Allen, speaking of Roman Polanski.
Now there's the Anna Frank animated movie.
Right.
Have you seen it?
I have.
Is it good?
I was at the premiere at the Jerusalem Film Festival last week.
Is it any good? I read a review that says basically that it missed in the sense that in the end there's an interpretation that relates to the immigrant problem nowadays. So the message of the movie takes the Anne Frank story and tries to say something about the current immigration and like what does it have to do with that? What do you think about? Is it? I haven't seen the film, so.
You did pretty well. I have a section in my book all about the entire history of Anne Frank films, and her diary,
including this movie.
I mentioned this movie too. Even though I was going to press, I did mention it because I knew enough. This movie's been coming out for 8 years.
Yeah.
This is
crazy.
not. And also, interestingly, Ari Folman, who made the film, made the best of all time Perpetrator film, the best Holocaust perpetrator film, a film about a Nazi after the Holocaust who's chased down. So we've already talked about the 3 best in their categories.
The one that takes place in the north?
Yes,
in
called
the snow.
Made in Israel.
Made in Israel, yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah.
It's
a good movie, yeah.
It's a great movie. But, okay, so I talk about the history of the diary and all of the Anne Frank films that have been made. There have been a couple of other animated Anne Frank films. There have been some that have gone all the way to the death camps. Most of them until 1985 were based on the Broadway play, which was feckless, which, I mean, it was limp. It didn't deal with the Holocaust. It didn't deal with her Jewishness. It could have been anybody hidden. But this particular film, Ari Folman, he had a film before this called The Congress, where it was like an acid trip with...
not a good one, in my opinion.
With Robin Wright and Harvey Keitel.
Have you seen it, Eitan? No?
It was after Waltz with Bashir. It's in the same style. So this is animated, and he gives the diary its own spirit. It comes alive. It somehow breaks out of the case in the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, and he anthropomorphizes it. He turns it into a human being who can see people, which was interesting, in the Anne Frank house, wander around. And then if the spirit Kitty leaves the premises, turns into a real person that people can see. But like Cinderella, at a certain point, in this case, when tourists will be arriving back into the Anne Frank house, if she doesn't make it back in, she's out forever as a human being. So she can return as a spirit. So she does that a couple of times. And then she sees someone who is pickpocketing, taking wallets in the Anne Frank house, in Anne's room. And she sees him on the street and when she's out there free, and she falls in love with him. And he saves her from... Because she's taken the diary. That's the other... She's actually taken the diary, and all the police are looking for her. And so they're making out, and she doesn't...
Sounds like an acid trip.
And at the end, she's on a roof, and spoiler alert, and all the police are down there, and everybody's down there, and she's up there with refugees from wherever, doesn't matter. She's up there.
Obviously not from Norwegia.
Not from
Norway.
Norway. Yeah.
Well, actually the Netherlands, but whatever. But she's up there with current refugees, and she says, I will burn this, I will put it into this fire if you don't let these refugees live in the Netherlands.
That's to me. That's it's diminishing the Holocaust as a whole, and Anna Frank in particular.
I like Ari Folman's. I like Waltz with Bashir, and I like Made in Israel. I love Made in Israel, and I think he had a lot of courage to make Waltz with Bashir. And I've asked him for an interview. He probably won't give one to me now that I roasted this, but I'd really be interested in and he's a nice guy.
He probably did it for the money. That's
I don't
my
think
opinion.
so. No. I think it's the opposite. He had relatives. People had put money into this. It was being produced for years and years and years. I don't think he could get out from underneath it. I don't. Gamza Latova. I mean, it's done.
So I'm sure that you discuss in the book, or I suppose you discuss in the book, and you mentioned Inglourious Basterds, but films that either totally fictionalize the parts of the Holocaust, or I mean, there's a lot of stories that are told that aren't necessarily based on a true story. What's your take on the idea of creating a story that's set in such a sensitive historical time, and the potential of, messing with history and messing with the narrative?
Great question. Until 1997, when Life is Beautiful came out, it was very common for core Holocaust stories, that is, about righteous Gentiles or about victims, to be based on fiction. And Life is Beautiful killed that dead. After Life is Beautiful, with the exception of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, there hasn't been a fictional, a major fictional, there really has not been a fictional death camp film made. And very few fictional films that aren't farce. Inglourious Basterds is clearly farce. And it's a great film, and it is one of the top 3 recommended tangential miscellaneous films, including Sophie's Choice also. But in terms of the core representations of the Holocaust, obviously, people don't need fiction about death camps anymore. We know too much. We don't know necessarily that if we see somebody in a labor camp and they have a tattoo, that there's a problem with it because only tattoos were in Auschwitz. And that's a little bit in the weeds. But we know that a father can't hang out with his kid on a tank or play with him in Auschwitz. And there's no reason for that anymore. So the stories about righteous Gentiles are all true. There aren't fictional stories except for that crap. I mean, that bad film, Jojo Rabbit.
So bad I couldn't even finish it. It's so...
It's horrific.
Yeah. And it's made by a Jew.
Yes, I'm aware of that. But it doesn't mean anything.
I mean...
I didn't see it.
The greatest... look...
It just hurts a little bit more. That's it.
Okay. There have been good Holocaust films made by non-Jews.
Yeah.
The greatest Jewish movie of all time, Fiddler on the Roof, was made by a non-Jew.
Right. Although his name Norman
Jewison, yeah. But still.
Yeah. We had Topol on the show, by the way.
Oh, exciting!
Many years ago.
Okay, so Yeah, he's Jewish. But anyway, righteous Gentile films are almost universally true. Perpetrator films, except if they have to do with Eichmann and Mengele, are universally fictional, like Boys from Brazil, about cloning Adolf Hitler. My favorite story about this is Marathon Man, which is Dustin Hoffman. Have you seen Marathon?
Yeah.
So he plays just a kid in New York, a graduate student in New York, whose brother he doesn't realize, but his brother is in the CIA. And his brother's job is to get information about Nazis. And he gets the information from this old Nazi who named Zell, who is kind of like Mengele. And he's been hiding out in Argentina, and he's played by Laurence Olivier.
Sir
Laurence Olivier, who also was in Boys from Brazil. And he plays his trick during the Holocaust was that he was a dentist, and the way he would get information from people was he would drill on them on their teeth, and he would, and so Roy Scheider, who played Dustin Hoffman's brother, would give him money and diamonds. He had a storehouse of diamonds in New York that Zell did, the Nazi, and Roy Scheider would make sure he could live comfortably in exchange for giving up the old Nazis that he knew about. Mm-hmm. But then the courier was killed, and Zell was worried that his diamonds were going to be stolen by Dustin Hoffman. And so they kidnap. So he comes back to America, Zell does. He kidnaps Dustin Hoffman. He puts him in a dental chair, and he starts to drill on him.
It's one of the most famous scenes, I think.
And he says, is it safe? And Dustin Hoffman has no idea what he's saying. Is it? Oh, yeah, it's very safe. Is it? No, it's terribly dangerous. Just stop drilling. You got to see the scene. Just go to YouTube and see, is it safe? And the original script for it was written by Goldman. I forget his first name, but he wrote.
Not Akiva, right?
No. William Goldman.
William Goldman.
He wrote Princess Bride and the novel behind it. He wrote. He's one of the greatest screenwriters and novelists. Hollywood is filled with his work. And John Schlesinger was the director. And Hoffman is sitting in this meeting for the film before that calls for him at the end of the film to kill the Nazi. And he says, I won't do it. He says, no Jew would do it. He says, go get Al Pacino to play this part. Do whatever you want, but I won't effing kill him. It won't happen. And these guys who were a big deal in Hollywood were saying, that's what doesn't matter. And in fact, that's the way it's always been with Perpetrator films. Even if a Jew is sitting there with a gun to the head of a Nazi, the Jew
doesn't pull the trigger.
Never.
Although we know the Jews did try to avenge.
Not in film. They don't.
Yeah.
In Made in Israel, I don't want to spoil the ending, but you remember how that goes?
No, I saw it a long time ago.
In Boys from Brazil, there Laurence Olivier is the Nazi. Is not the Nazi. He's the Nazi hunter. He's playing Simon Wiesenthal. He has a gun to the head, basically, of Gregory Peck, who's Joseph Mengele. And at the very last minute, after almost 3 hours of this endless film, a pack of dogs comes in and eats him. Right. It's that's how you remember Hachov, the debt. Mm-hmm. Do the Jews who go to or walk on water, another Israeli, do the Jews end up killing? No, never.
But in reality, there are instances, and so why do you think there's this dissonance?
It's the Dustin Hoffman principle. You just don't do it. You just don't make the Jews look like the Nazis.
It's a matter of moral equivalence. It's a matter that we won't stoop to that level.
It's a thing.
Or
and
is it moral like pretension? Because
I don't look at it that way. It's just the way that Hollywood works. You just can't do it.
So I have a few questions I gotta get out of the way. So first of all, you talked about Life is Beautiful. There's this book in Hebrew, I don't know if you heard about it, that critiques Life is Beautiful heavily. Because it claims that it hides like the hard parts. So by doing that, like you never see anything harsh in the movie. Everything is off camera. Even the final scene when he's being executed is off camera. So he claims that by that, it's sort of a Holocaust denial-ish thing because he won't show you. It's all happy, happy, joy, joy. And so what do you think about that? That's my question.
Okay, so my field of study is narrative Holocaust film. It's not documentaries. And all narrative film, I don't care what film it is, all narrative film is fictional. Even if it's portraying something that's true. It doesn't matter if it's Lincoln. It doesn't matter if it's Argo. It doesn't matter. It's an interpretation of what happened. There was no camera in the room when it happened. So let's start there. Okay? And if you look at it from that point of view, then you can say that every film has the ability to be fuel for Holocaust denial, because nothing is exactly the way it was. You can take anything and say it's not true. In that particular film, you don't have to go that far. You can just say, well, what are Americans doing riding into Auschwitz? You know, there used to be an American president named Barack Obama. No, I knew. And when Obama was campaigning before he was president, he said that he had an uncle who was an Auschwitz liberator. And one of the reporters said, so your uncle was in the Red Army? And he said, let me get back to you on that. And he looks it up and he found out that it was Buchenwald, and it was a great uncle. But in Life is Beautiful, they're American tanks who were riding in and liberating this place. Now, in their defense, and obviously it was the Soviets, it wasn't America. In the defense of the movie, they never say it's Auschwitz. They imply it's Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. But they never... it doesn't matter, though. It's fiction. So anybody... Why? That's the one thing they're going to use for Holocaust denial?
No, but I mean, it's if you compare it to The Pianist, like, how do you feel? You in the end of the day, Life is Beautiful is a feel-good movie, right? Yeah. And The Pianist isn't.
No, it's tragic. The whole idea is that I think that they're well aware of the contrast that they're creating. The idea that there's this veneer of happiness that you'd only be able to sell to a child and not to an actual way. It's playing on the fact that that behind the curtain there's this horrible thing happening. And I think that's the whole idea of Life is Beautiful.
Well, except the father dies. I mean, classically, it's a tragedy, and Schindler's List isn't. Classically, if you say that tragedy is when you don't succeed and otherwise it's not, then The Pianist is not a tragedy.
Because he lives.
Because he lives.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's the measure of it. The Pianist is a great film. The greatest thing about The Pianist, though, especially when you contrast it with Schindler's List, is that Roman Polanski, who made the film, who was a Holocaust survivor, and very much was like what was in The Pianist, his life. He had a Nazi in there, and it was a true story. A soldier named Hosenfeld, who helped the pianist, the Adrian Brody character. And that man, too, has been honored by Yad Vashem as righteous among the Gentiles. But Polanski never elevated him to the level that Spielberg elevated Schindler. Polanski could have done so much with that. Instead, he created a distance between Adrian Brody's character and the Nazi, that they weren't buddies. And even in the end, where he's in a pen, where the Nazi is basically a POW who's about to be shot by the Soviets, Brody has nothing to do with him. He walks away. Like, okay, so you helped me a little bit, but you're a Nazi. Goodbye. And that was the courage. That was really the courage of Polanski, was not to fall into the trap of, and it should be said that Polanski was offered Schindler's List by Spielberg, who took 10 years. He was looking for other people to direct it. He owned the property, and he didn't feel he was ready to do it. And I have great respect for Steven Spielberg, enormous respect. I like none of his movies, but I have. I like Catch Me If You Can, but
as a person, not as a
yet
director.
another one who won't be interviewed for your next book.
As
Harry Fullman and Spielberg, you're two
as
nemesis.
a person, he's great. He's a wonderful man. He's a great philanthropist. He's never done anything to dishonor the Jews. He's never done anything. He just, I don't like his filmmaking generally, and in Schindler's List,
especially.
I can never forgive him for his shower fake out scene, where he puts Jews in a shower and makes the audience believe there's going to be gas that comes out, which is not the way it happened. If they were going to be in a shower, it wasn't a sealed room where everybody knew that they were going to be. These were people off the train. I mean, this was so manipulative. It's like in Indiana Jones, where you're sitting face to face with a bunch of snakes. What? It's just to scare the audience.
But as you said, I mean, the whole idea is, the whole idea of creating a Holocaust film is to create fiction and to get across a message and to tell a narrative that's set in a certain time. And I mean, it's still a movie. You're still trying to get your audience to feel things, to have some kind of sensation. So, I mean, if you use a little bit of manipulation, then what's the big deal?
Well, I didn't say that the whole idea was to make fiction, Eitan. I said that they are all fictional at some point, that there's fiction in all of them. If you're Quentin Tarantino, then it's clear to everybody that everything in it is fictional, whether it's Once Upon a Time in America, where we know afterwards that the Mansons did kill Sharon Tate, or in Inglourious Basterds, where we know that Adolf Hitler was not killed in a movie theater by Jewish refugees who were American soldiers.
But here people watch this scene and they're like, that's how it happened.
In this case, Schindler's List was so specific about the Holocaust that the daughter of the commandant, that was played by Ralph Fiennes. The real daughter of the commandant saw the film and recognized that it was her father, who she had never met. Everything in this film was intended to be specific. How they built the Warsaw Ghetto, everything. So if you're implying that everything's true, and then afterwards you have a scene like this that implies that Jews knew that they were going into a gas chamber and did nothing, which is what that scene says. You look around a room with 1,000 people that all know that the gas is going to flow, and they just walk in. That's what that scene is implying.
And that is not accurate, in the sense that what Jews that knew that they were going into the gas chambers, or they didn't know ever, or that when they did know, they somehow tried to object. Like
they didn't. That was the most guarded secret of the Germans. Was what was going to happen there. These people got up, they were starved after days on a train, disoriented, marched into a room. These were the people who were going to be killed, marched into a rooms separated, stripped and shoved into a sealed gas chamber. How would they know what's going to happen to them? 1 or 2 out of 1,000 may have heard a story, but they wouldn't have known. And anybody who did know, basically the Sando Commando, if they escaped, they were hunted down and killed. The Germans would let some people, I mean, they didn't hunt down everybody who got out, but those people were not allowed to. This was not a known thing. There were people who thought, we're not going to survive this place, but they didn't know we're going to go into a shower and gas is going to come out.
Okay, so here's the question. You know, when you sent me an email and told me about your book, I knew I had to have you to ask this question, because this question has been bothering me for 15 years at least. So we live in Israel, and if you live in Israel, Holocaust is in your veins, right? You grow up in like every year, Holocaust Day, the siren, in the education system, and in your ancestry. It's everywhere, and we breathe it, and it's in our blood. And while in the last few decades, I think hundreds of millions of shekels were invested by the government into Israeli fiction films, there is no movie ever made in Israel that actually takes place during the Holocaust, right? It's always one of the other of the four. It's in After Effects.
Perpetrator.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
They're mostly survivor films.
Never ever was there a movie that actually takes place in the Holocaust. Not documentary, but fiction. How do you explain that?
Right. Well, first let's say that Israel makes really good survivor films. One director in particular, Eli Cohen, not, obviously The Spy.
Mm-hmm. He made TV movies mostly.
He made the two with Gila Almagor. In English, it's Summer with Avia.
Kites Shel Avia, yeah.
Right, and Under the Doomum Tree,
mm-hmm.
Which they were a continuation of each other.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is a recommended film of mine, and he also was the director of a Canadian film called I'll remember it. About two survivors having a conversation in Montreal. And there was another Israeli film called Letters to America. Mechtavim. I don't know if you know this one. Hanan
No.
Peled.
No, don't know this one.
Which was about a survivor who had a family, has a family, and he hears that his brother, that somebody with his brother's name is working for John Kennedy. Obviously this is 1961, 1962. A perfectly reasonable Jewish name that a million people have. John Schwartz or whatever is working for John. And he's convinced it's his brother, who everybody knows is dead from Auschwitz. Everybody. So he writes a letter to this man, hoping that, beyond hope, that it's going to be. And he waits and he harasses the mailman. His family is miserable and just waiting. And finally the little boy finds someone in the city who has an English typewriter and types out a letter. Dear, I hope you're doing well. Yes, I'm from that city, but I'm not your brother, but I hope that you have a nice day and we can meet someday. And it's very sweet. And so this is what he needed. So to answer your question, in order to make those films, victim films and righteous Gentile films, you need to have today especially, you need to do the whole thing. You can't just go into a into a set and set up a couple of wooden beds, and say, okay, we're at Auschwitz. You got to have a budget. You got to have a film. You're not. This isn't saying that. And Israelis, don't generally have that budget to make those huge.
I always felt like that's an excuse, you know.
Well,
Because-
do you know a lot of Israeli films that have a $10 million budget? I can't think of any.
No, but first of all, today the budgets are bigger with also TV shows, the TV industry. But I don't know. I feel in 2021, you can get away with like you can make movies for less money than 20 years ago, right? It's a cheaper endeavor, and also you can make an indie film. I feel. I don't know.
Well, if you feel better about that, I mean, if it'll make you feel better, that the people who produced The Gray Zone were Israelis. It just wasn't Israeli produced.
Right.
So, but you take who are the biggest Israeli filmmakers? I mean, who's bigger than
Avi Neshel is the biggest one.
Yeah,
Avi Neshel could have done it if
Yeah.
he wanted to do it. He would have done it, right?
Or maybe Joseph Cedar.
Yeah, Joseph Cedar also. If those two guys would want to do a Holocaust movie that takes place actually during the Holocaust, they would have pulled it off.
So why don't you think?
I think it has to do maybe with the same reason, right? They won't show a Jew shoots a Nazi, and to me, it's just. And it has to do with the reason Ari Fullman puts the refugees in the end of they don't want to deal. I think the reason is political. To me, it's political. Those people don't want to deal with the consequences and the meaning of actually putting back to life those because it means it has consequences, right, for today even. And they just don't want to shove it down our memory and focus on easier themes like guilt and stuff like that you have in the survivor genre. That's my interpretation. But
I don't see Israeli films doing big things like this. I mean, Beaufort perhaps was, but even then, these are you got to really. These are not easy films to make, and you also have to have the story. What story are you?
Oh, come on!
But what story are you missing from the Holocaust at this point? I mean, what story in the Holocaust? I'm talking about during the Holocaust. What story are you missing? What has not been told?
No, but I think also the first point is a good one. Can you think of an example of another Israeli film where it wasn't set in the current times in Israel, or at least the roughly the era where a lot of money was spent on costumes, on sets, on creating a whole different time period?
Avi Nesher had several of those, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it wasn't set in Israel.
It was.
Well,
Like the Entebbe film had money behind it, but those guys had money, and
Yeah. I don't know. To me, it's a problem.
it's
Simply
not a problem because we do so well with the survivor films. We've made so many good survivor films, and Made in Israel is a great perpetrator film.
I'll tell you the problem with survival films, in my opinion, right? I think about young people, Jews and non-Jews, who simply don't know what the Holocaust is. So to them, a survival film is meaningless. It's meaningless. They need actual films that take place. They need if you want people to understand 20, 30, 40 years from now, you got to keep doing films that actually take place during the Holocaust. Otherwise, because people are not going to see The Gray Zone, young people, they can't see those movies. They're even I don't know if in 20 years The Pianist will be watchable by young people with their mentality. So, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like it's important to make... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I understand. I had a revelation while we were talking. I mean, something came to my mind that solves all of our problems. It's done. We don't even have to worry about this anymore. I mean, it's finished.
Computer games.
No.
Oh.
No, we have it. You're talking about an Israeli-made Holocaust film that takes place during the Holocaust.
The Instagram story movie thing with the girl,
Yeah.
Ava's stories?
Ava's story.
No, although
That was awful.
although I did write a scathing review of it for the Jerusalem Post.
Okay.
Look it up.
Okay.
I also wrote a scathing review of the Anne Frank video diary that also came out. And the producer of that was very kind and wrote a beautiful blurb for my book, even though he was quoted in this.
Even he knew it was crap.
he not the film, the book, but
yeah.
But wait, so what's the solution?
oh, I forget. No, you have the movie. Anne Frank, Ari Folman. He made one. You got it. Okay, you got your wish. It came true. What?
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
You didn't say it had to be good, and you didn't say it had to be.
It obviously has to be good.
And you didn't say it had to be a news story.
But I think that segues to my next point. That have you watched? I guess you don't play computer games, right? Or I'm being stereotypical, but do you play computer games? Because Castle Wolfenstein. Have you heard about those games?
No, I play Settlers of Catan online.
Okay, but have you heard about Escape from Castle Wolfenstein?
No, I've heard of there's a Hitler board game.
No, I don't know about that.
This is a computer game.
So, Escape from Castle Wolfenstein is one of the first video games ever made in 3D, just after Doom, and it's famous. And now they've been remaking it for several years. And I think maybe that's the solution because it's really good. It's the genre that you told me on your email that you don't like, which is sci-fi and Holocaust. But it's like an alternative history game where it's in the 60s and the Nazis won and they rule over entire Europe, and you play in this underground militia that tries to overthrow them. But it's really, really good. It's really well made, and the
but
story
it's
is
a
great.
solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Because you already have the answer to your question, which is we made the Anne Frank movie now, and it's done.
Also, if you're trying to educate the youth about like history, I don't think you want to have a Escape from Castle Wolfenstein.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure
where
about
it's an alternate history.
I'm not sure. I think it's good it's a good way.
Why? It'll be like a gateway. It'll get them interested in the history.
First of all,
and then
yes.
they'll look it
Second
up.
of all, it does show in a very grotesque way who were the Nazis, what were they all about. It is grotesque, but on the other hand, Nazis were grotesque, right?
But that was the theory behind. Well, first of all, there was an Anne Frank video game. I'm gonna tell you right now.
Was there?
There was.
Oh,
Okay.
God.
Okay, and there were Anne Frank
horrifying.
cosmetics and an Anne Frank Halloween costume, and okay,
Wow.
so okay, but that was the problem with Ava's stories, is that they thought, you know what, we're gonna send this out on Instagram, and all the kids it's gonna be a gateway for them, and they're all gonna, from FOMO, they're gonna jump on and want to learn about the Holocaust, and it was a piece of crap. I mean, it was just like there's this girl with Instagram overlays, and you're supposed to like her and send her love, and it was a complete lie that they had hundreds of millions of followers, or that it had been viewed hundreds of millions, whatever it was. It was like it was
a PR stunt.
It was an unbelievable stretch because it was segmented into like 30 pieces, and people who had watched one a little bit. I mean, it was so misleading. The people had they made it in good faith. They wanted to move the needle.
Yeah, did they?
Oh, of course they did. But
Or did they just want to get?
No, they spent a fortune on it. No. These people made it in good faith, and I have to say that there is no genre of film that has had more variation than Holocaust film. There's absolutely, they've done everything. There's been science fiction, animation, and web stuff, and
superheroes. X-Men.
Absolutely, X-Men is
first scene of the first movie. One of to me, amazing. Scene.
No, for sure, it's a survivor film. The entire thing, absolutely, it's listed as a survivor film, and so is X-Men First Class, where the first 9 minutes he's in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
For sure. There has been they've tried shorts, they've had miniseries, they've had films that are 4 hours long. They've had every possible variation of film. And some work and some don't, but in the end...
You haven't had like a slapstick comedy yet.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Really?
yeah. Oh, for sure they have. They've had a dozen, and some of them are good. One of the most recommended films I have is called Genghis Khan, which is about a Nazi in Germany who is in the 1950s. He's a police captain. Nobody knows he was a Nazi. And there was a Jew who was a comedian who he killed. You see him kill him in a ravine. And the last thing the Jew says to him is, "Kiss my ass," in Yiddish. And then the Jew comes back as a ghost and drives him crazy. Just nuts. And it's total slapstick. There's another great film, another great German film called Mein Führer. And it goes on, the name is like, My Führer, the greatest Führer who ever Führer lived.
And of course, Charlie Chaplin.
Well, okay, so...
Great dictator.
So Mein Führer is kind of what the great dictator wanted to be, without that stupid ending of Chaplin's and the whole Mussolini bacteria thing that he had. In this case, in Mein Führer, the premise is great, where toward the end of the last days of the war, the Führer has lost his mojo. He's like depressed, and he can't really motivate the troops anymore. Berlin's about to fall, and they really need to get him going. So they go to one of the death camps, and they get this famous acting director who's a Jew, and they know that this Jew is going to frustrate and aggravate and annoy Hitler so much that he'll get his mojo back. And they bring him in, and get
the anti-Semitism back in him.
It is such a funny, and they have the fourth wall ending like in The Great Dictator, but they do it right. So and there's another one called the Train of Life, total slapstick, about a village in Poland where they hear that what's really happening, and so they decide to make a train and take it to Palestine. The whole thing is slapstick, and there are many others that are good. In fact, really, only Life is Beautiful and Jojo Rabbit as comedies fail, but maybe one or two others, but mostly they succeed.
Wow.
So, it does lead to one last question maybe we'll end on, and I wonder what your thoughts are on Holocaust humor. I mean, jumping off the comedy, Holocaust comedy movies, but like generally speaking, not necessarily only contained to the film world, but jokes about the Holocaust. How do you kind of perceive that whole thing? Because there's the one side where it's that's the way that Jews cope with it, and on the other side it's this thing that we can't desecrate. And so how do you kind of, what's your take on that?
Well, I always start when people talk about Holocaust comedy with Robin Williams.
Jacob the Liar.
No. That was another Holocaust comedy that failed.
Yeah.
Robin Williams, but a good call. Robin Williams is being interviewed by a German, and the German asked him in German television, why is it that you think that we have such a problem that Germans aren't funny? And he said, perhaps it's because you killed all the funny people. Now, you can tell that joke, and it's not tasteless. And you can repeat Robin Williams saying it, and it's not tasteless. It's like Ricky Gervais had a bit where he's talking about Anne Frank and the Germans every day going into the house, and they hear this typing, and I don't know what that sound. He does a whole bit about it. It's hilarious. You can do things that are tasteful. I mean, it can be done. It's not a black or white thing. It's on the spectrum. If it's funny and it's tasteful, then of course you can do it. If it's distasteful, it's like any other humor. You can make jokes about gay people or black people or anybody else as long as.
Yeah, but if you're a neo-Nazi, that's another story.
I mean, it's a risk-reward thing. I think that it's if it's funny, it's tasteful. The second it's not funny, it's
but
right.
That's
it's
true
like,
about everything. I mean, you somebody who's making a joke about car salesmen. If it's funny, it's funny. If it's not, it's not. Ricky Gervais can make anything funny. He can ruin it too. But
it's just a high-risk situation, so you don't want to step into it unless you're one of the best. Because if you try and make a joke and it turns out badly, then you're seen as
okay,
then it's an awful thing.
okay,
But if it had just been timed right or whatever, and it was funny, then it would be funny.
But by definition, if it's somebody that we know about, then they've gotten to a point where they are one of the best. I mean, we're not talking Omri Caspi here, who had an okay career. He's a fine guy. He played. We're talking about people who actually, Robin Williams, Ricky Gervais. These people were all stars. These were so. Any comedian who is worthy, I mean, John Mulaney. I mean, people know how to handle a joke, just like you would know how to handle anything that's radioactive. You do it the right way, and you can make something out of it. And if you don't, you burn yourself up.
Yeah.
So, guys, the new book is coming out this month. Go
God
to
willing. HolocaustFilms.com.
HolocaustFilms.com and purchase the book. Will there be a digital version too, or only hard copy?
There will be a digital version, and you can also join the mailing list there. And I'm new to this. I'm new to publicity. I'm new to podcasts. I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
And if any, I hate to ask this, but if any of your listeners can think of ways for me to get my message out, I'm going to look in the camera. If any of you can
right in the eye.
if any of you can help me figure out how to get the message out about my book and Holocaust films, I'll be very appreciative.
How can people reach out? You're on social media?
I am, but go to holocaustfilms.com and you'll see
Contact us.
A contact form. You could, that's the best way. I'm not too hard to find. Rich Brownstein. It's not too hard.
Okay, cool.
But you guys have been great.
Thank you.
It's such an honor to make my podcast debut with you.
Thank you so much. Our
It's
pleasure.
Our honor.
So, Rich has gotten a present.
Yes.
And which is the mug. He is a nice Jewish boy. He got a nice Jewish boy mug. And we also have
a BDS Tears mug. So if you want to get your own BDS Tears mug or nice Jewish boy mug, then go to 2njb.com/merch, guys, for the incredible price of $15 and free shipping.
Yeah.
So check that out. And of course,
so the podcast is made in collaboration with Arutz Sheva. Check them out at israelnationalnews.com for great content in English about Israel. Also,
AJN.timesofisrael.com, the Australian Jewish news for the Australian angle, opinions, news, great source, AJN.timesofisrael.com.
Last but not least, we accept also donations. So if you want to help us out, go to 2njb.com/donate. And that is it. Thank you so much, Rich.
Thank you, Rich.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you, boys. You do a great job.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.